founding Vice Chancellor and my boss, Professor Rajkumar, the Vice Chancellor of Southampton, and of course my friend, Professor Sal. So it's a great pleasure and honor to be here, and I too want to thank all of you for making it. I'll be brief. The motivation for writing a book is always a labor of love. There's no question that, barring a few authors, most of the authors write it because they are driven by something, that indefinable something to write a book. For me, that indefinable something was I spent 10 years in Geneva negotiating GATT and WTO, one of the toughest arenas for India actually. And all of my colleagues, especially Americans and Europeans, would say, "You're such a wonderful guy. Outside of the arena, we have a drink and you're such a nice guy, but why are you so cussed when it comes to negotiations? You're such a naysayer. We put forward proposals and India says no, no, no." So much so, an American asked me where I was trained in the Foreign Service, and I said, "Why do you ask?" He said, "You have 1,000 different ways of saying no to my proposal. I want to know where you were trained." So that kind of made me want to tell people seriously that there is a reason why India says no. And that was really a kind of a negative factor, if you like, but that is the real truth to this book. And then I started thinking about, why do we say no after all? Intellectual property rights. We were the last country standing. Every other country said, yes, it's fine. And the American would come and tell me, "Listen, Indians are the most intelligent people I know in the Bay Area. Why do you, of all countries, why do you oppose intellectual property rights? Doesn't make sense." So I said, let me write about this. And what I've done, without taking too much of time, and I hope all of you will get a copy and read it, is I have created an integrated or crafted an integrated framework for assessment, which you can use for examining Indian actions in the international arena. And to my great surprise, I'm no surprise that in WTO it's easy to kind of apply this framework. I found that it applies equally to climate change. More importantly, and to my great surprise, and an author also, in writing, discovers himself a little bit, he discovers his own thinking and so on. I found that even in Ukraine, you can actually apply this framework. So very briefly, what is this framework? Some of it is common for all countries, but there are some things which are absolutely unique to India. For example, I talk of the Gandhi litmus test or the poverty veto, for example. And most people don't realize we have a massive number of people living in poverty in India. And that has to have an impact on India's actions. Whether it is buying Russian oil in the context of the war in Ukraine, whether it is opposing intellectual property rights tooth and nail in the WTO, because we simply don't have a social safety net for these 500 million people, or climate change, opposing to a phase out of coal rather than a phase down of coal. It's not quibbling. It's much more than that. You're worried about the poor people in India, and I call it the poverty veto, and I make the point that we should be able to bring this number. I assess that this number is 500 million. Assessing property numbers in India is also not easy. It's very, very complicated. But the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana already says there are 800 million people who receive subsidized 1 kilo of lentils and 5 kilos of food grains. I haven't gone that far. I've used $3 per day, not extreme poverty, which is 1.9, and $3 also kind of fits in with the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Scheme. The salary or the money that is paid, daily wages, also roughly is $3. You end up with a number of 500 million. So the central contention of this book is that India is well on its way to becoming a leading power from a balancing power or a swing power. But in order to do that, I think the most important challenge from my perspective is to bring this 500 million to something like 150 million, and at the same time make this growth inclusive so that you have a pie that is shared by everybody. And this should be really commonsensical. I then talk of course, geopolitical imperatives, how because of the power differential with China, India is now this close to the West and the United States, to really becoming an ally, but we will not be an ally, but we are close, we are very close. And that is because of what international relations scholars call external balancing. Because the power differential with China is so big and it can't be bridged anytime soon. So India has to perforce deal with these partnerships. Quad, I think, is the best example of it, but there are others. I then talk of domestic politics. How domestic politics played a crucial role in the WTO negotiations. Climate change as well. I mean, I mentioned the period when we had 2 envoys in climate change, 3 actually, but one of them has died late. Ambassador Chandrasekhar Das Gupta, who was amazing. Shyam Saran, who was an outstanding officer. But then we also had Jairam Ramesh, who was a Minister of State for Environment Affairs. And then domestic politics cannot be avoided in a rough and tumble democracy like India, so that should be obvious as a factor. You then have material gain. And one of the things that one of the surprising conclusions that I came to, because I've looked at all the statements that we made, beginning with America's intervention in Vietnam, right up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I find that India has actually adopted realpolitik. It's not as if India has always said, oh my God, we should be on the right side of history, this side of history. No, I think we've been very, very pragmatic, right from the time we were independent. Yes, there is a commitment to multilateralism and a commitment to principles, but there has been a very, very pronounced streak of realpolitik. We condemned the American invasion of Iraq, but on Soviet intervention in Afghanistan, we kind of quibbled, We kind of pussyfooted and said, we will see. But that's because realpolitik, right? I mean, we had nobody else, so Soviet Union was important. So I just want to, I can go on, and that's not the purpose of this evening, but I think for me, I have learned also in writing this book, but as I said earlier, I think the important conclusion I come to is that I think the old saying of Bill Clinton, it's the economy is stupid. Really, I think India has to become a 10 trillion economy. We simply have to get inclusive economic growth, and I make the point then there is nothing which can stop India. In that sense, India finds itself in a geopolitical sweet spot, but I think we need to get this economic act together because we need more and more resources just for conducting foreign policy, security policy. Look at the neighborhood, the money that we have invested in Afghanistan, money we have invested in Maldives, the money we are likely to invest in Sri Lanka. We were the first responders. So you need money at the end of the day. And for that to happen, I think India really has to become a prosperous country. I don't think we should be content with just beating Canada, France, UK. They're much smaller countries, I was making the point. For a country of 1.4 billion, you simply have to have a much bigger GDP. The good news is I think we are well on our way. I end with the epilogue of the G20, which all of you noticed. I think this is the beginning of the transition for me from a swing power to really a leading power. It's not certain, but I think we can certainly say with confidence that India bids fair to do that. So once again, thank you all for coming. I hope I have sufficiently aroused your curiosity for you to go and buy this book at the cost of less than a pizza, just in case you guys know. So thank you very much for your attention. Raj, thank you so much.